Hello, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria and the sixth episode of the Metroid Prime Hypermode challenge. Today, as I promised last time, we will be tackling Thardus. And as a little extra special treat, I'm going to admit a couple things. First and foremost, I was wrong. So, I did a little bit of digging regarding the origin of the Metroids on planet Talon 4. And there's a little throwaway line in on one of the computers in the frigate Orpheon, which states that they brought the Metroids with them from Zebes. However, that's not where this ends. Prime has been here for about 50 years. I in the span of the time that I've been playing this so far, have been slowly blasting my way through the entire Metroid Prime trilogy in hopes of having a Hypermode ready file for future videos. And I came across the gestation chamber in Metroid Prime 3. For those that know what room this is, great. For those that don't, it is the last room before you fight the final boss of the trilogy. Now, in the ceiling of that room, there are husks, specifically husks of a creature identical to the Metroid Prime. And that made me come to the realization that Prime was never a creature of Talon 4. Rather, the Metroid Prime itself came with the Phazon meteor that effectively started the chain of events that began the game. Now, along with that, there's a couple other questions that need to be answered, or potential questions that could be answered. The first is, why were Metroids on phase to begin with? Now, we know based on the enemies that appear on phase that Metroids and Miniroids, as they're called, do exist on phase. But absolutely none of them are, well, they're all acting in defense of phase rather than harnessing strength, which to me seems as though they've evolved to handle Phazon energy more specifically, which would mean that they would have been put on phase X number of years ago, as the Metroids exist in their current state because of the Chozo, specifically through genetic modification to create these beings. Now, I admit that it's a little bit far-fetched, but in theory, because Metroids were created specifically to combat the X-Parasite, it is possible, at least in my mind, that Phazon is simply a evolution of the X-Parasite, so to speak. One that is meant to harness the power of the creatures that exist around it, so that the X-Parasite can continue to grow, or grow in number. Because if the number one predator of the X is dependent on Phazon or this evolution, then it won't be fighting against it, it will be protecting the one thing that can actually, or that it was meant to defeat. Anyway, that's my whole spiel on that. You know, tell me what you think, because honestly, it's a little half-baked in my opinion. And coming back here to Thardus, it kind of touches on the point that I was kind of getting at. Thardus is effectively just a sentient mass of stones. Now, in the original development of the game, there are hints to suggest in that Thardus was perhaps supposed to be battled in Magmoor Caverns, but was ultimately moved to Vendrana Drifts, or I'm assuming so that they could simplify Magmoor Caverns to make it more of a transitional map rather than a primary or a expansive map. Part of that in the art book shows Thardus in a fiery locale, and part of it is can be seen in his design being about finding a hot spot in the mass of rocks, and that hot spot being its weak zone, which I think is kind of a nice twist on it. So far, I think we're actually doing rather well. Thardus is holding its own. Yeah, I'm gonna get frozen. Yep, there it is. I'll admit, Hypermode initially didn't scare me too much. I mean, I wasn't having any major issues. But Thardus here is far more aggressive than I remember him. And if that's the case, I'm going to end up with some issues in the later game, especially with probably the Omega Pirate. It's the one boss that I am probably the weakest against. Anyway, I had promised last time that I was going to touch in on what speedrunning is, or what the speedrunning ended up being. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how they managed it, but each version of the game has a slightly different time. So, with the original game, the thing with the Metroid Prime, the issue with Metroid Prime, specifically when it comes to speedrunning, is every time it's been remade, certain glitches and oversights have been patched out. The original version of the game, for example, had a glitch called scan jumping, where with proper angling and timing, you could jump long distances without having to worry about having the space jump boots, for example, which meant that you could get the space jump boots right off the beginning of the game and start up and you could get the space jump boots right off the hop, and that meant that you didn't have to follow the prescribed path as closely because you had the ability to jump over certain obstacles, which cuts down the time immensely, with the top 3 runners having a in-game time of under 50 minutes. The Metroid Prime Trilogy version patched out a number of major oversights and focused more so on fluidity of movement, as well as focusing in on using the boost ball, as well as the the morph ball and boost ball capabilities in order to speed along and really cut down on the length of time that you're moving from A to B. The top 3 runners of the Prime Trilogy version ended up with an in-game time of 1 hour and 20 minutes or less, with a total run time of 1 hour 43 or less. The Prime Remastered version tried everything in their power to really reduce the capabilities of speedrunners, and thus out-of-bounds glitches that and the light have been removed almost in its entirety. Thus, the top 3 runners are between an hour and a half and an hour 45. What this means, at least in my expectation or understanding, is that the game itself is a very difficult game to run, and the newer versions of it are meant to be harder and have more difficulty getting going, so to speak. There's a prescribed path they want the players to take it. Which, interestingly enough, looking at the design of each game in the trilogy, each game was designed with trying to take speedrunning out of the equation a little bit more. When you look at Metroid Prime compared to Prime 2 and 3, Prime 2 had its world segmented far more than Prime 1 did. Not that it's the end of the world, it's simply stating that you had to go through the opening to Agon Waste, to the Torvus Bog, to the Hive, etc., in order to proceed, because they had specific abilities tied to each area, and very specifically designed the world around those abilities, as well as prevented you from getting to areas that you otherwise shouldn't have been able to get to by sealing pathways behind you and whatnot. Prime 3 goes as far as you can't even enter certain planets without beating the prior one. Which means you must beat Norion before you can get to Brio. You must beat Brio before going to Elysia, and so on and so forth. It pushes the player to go in a specific path more than the other, or more than the prior games had. Okay, 10 minutes for Thardus. That was actually far longer than I was expecting. And definitely shows off how Hypermode is going to be treating us from here on out. And one last act of defiance. I don't think Samus likes it. And with that, we have the Spider Ball. Now, for those who know, for those who don't, quick recap. Spider Ball in the 2D games allows Samus to move along any surface that is not spiked, along the roof, walls, you name it. This allows her to traverse large areas with a level of efficiency that other games, or that other platformers of the time didn't offer. However, in the trilogy, or in the Prime games, the Spider Ball acts as a magnetic rail system. Or acts on a magnetic rail system. That's more specific. So Samus can't use it just anywhere. But with that in mind, each of the sections that require it are much more specifically built for the Spider Ball comparatively to what the original games were. What am I doing? Go back. We need to save because I do not trust myself. I am not dying today. Anywho, we're gonna take a little bit of a detour here, because now that we have the Spider Ball, I have a couple minor things that I'd like to pick up. Notably, I want to get preferably I'd like to try to get the Ice Beam, but I have a feeling that the best I'll be able to manage today is probably getting to maybe one of the artifacts, specifically the one in Flagra's arena. But we'll see. for now, we're going to take a little bit of a slower trek through Magmore Caverns and clear out as much as we can because I kind of have a feeling that it's going to be necessary. Okay. Oh, jeez. I'm not thinking properly. I need to... Right. Heat signatures and wave beam. Right. Yes. There we go. And little bit of a celebratory moment here. I realized the other day that the channel is now just over a year old, with my first video coming out on the 20th of July of last year. So if you're curious about that, please feel free to check out the Titanfall 2 videos. If not, no big deal. But it's definitely interesting to see how the channel has changed over the last year. And hey, I need to go that way. There we go. And so this is the first video that I've actually properly edited and worked on after the 1 year mark. So hooray. Anywho, we're on a timer now. And if I recall, this is going to have a healing up or a health upgrade, energy tank, which is definitely going to be helpful in the near future here. Because if I am remembering correctly, we're going to have probably... My goal for the next couple videos is going to be a little more loose, shall we say. Today it's going to be about collecting a couple artifacts from here on. And then next time I think we're going to collect the ice beam and head through the ruins of the Orpheon. I think that'll be the way to go about it. What I like about the fact that that's actually a section of the game is that in the introduction, in the intro of the game, the frigate Orpheon was actually destroyed and hit the planet probably not long after Samus arrived. It is impossible to access that area until you get the Morph Ball, but the thing is that it is actively available fairly early on as a landmark of sorts on Talon Overworld. That was delayed. So you can actually view it from an early point in time. Returning to it, you have more abilities and more going for you than the prior visit had. And so theoretically you can get more out of it. However, the decrepit state the Orpheon ends up in is a testament to game design as a whole, because if they had left it as it was from your first visit to your second, it wouldn't feel right. Actually, one of the viewers and subscribers had mentioned that immersion was something that they really enjoyed within the franchise. And I can kind of point at that and say that's one of the moments that really sells it for me, is being able to revisit an area with new abilities and really show off what the design team was looking at. Now, I will admit that immersion is done much better in the later games, but the fact that you're inside Samus's helmet to begin with, it is already a very immersive game, especially for the time that you were playing, or that it first came out back in the early 2000s. Jeez, early 2000s. Another one of those that makes me feel old moments. Anywho, we're skipping the Talon overworld elevator, and we're gonna exit the way we first arrived. Okay. Avoid the flamethrowers, not that that's the end of the world. And hopefully take down the one of the few Magmor that actually holds his own here. It's a shame, really. They're shown off to be so much stronger than they actually are for a lot of the time. Especially the initial run through here. The Magmors are much more dangerous the first time than any later opportunity. Partially because they're just spongy. They aren't dangerous in the traditional sense. They're just bulky. They hit hard. Or they don't hit hard. They take a hit. Oh yay, it's friends. Tommy. Oh, sorry, Tommy. Prepare for trouble. Okay, fantastic. So, I suppose we're gonna have two artifacts. There's a missile tank that I'd like to get right up over here. One of the harder ones to actually notice, it's just on the left in here. Buried inside one of those columns. Ow. The jetpackers are starting to get a little irritating as far... Wait, he survived? That's impressive. Those guys usually fall on a single strike. So inside that pillar there should be a missile tank, if my memory serves. Yep. The hard part about this one is getting up to it. Yeah. I think I'm gonna have to go around to the back. Probably. Hard to see back here, but... Yep, that's it. The next artifact, or the first artifact we're likely to get, is going to be inside a stone pillar. I believe it's 2 rooms ahead here? Yeah. And another case of, as you get stronger, it gets easier. Instead of having to morph ball your way through the floorboards, you can now just jump over the obstacles as you see fit. So, I'm curious. I've kind of been thinking about doing a little bit of a side series where I compare and contrast characters from my various challenge runs to one another to see roughly how they would fare against each other. I'm curious what you would think of that. Would it be fun? Would it be kind of meh? Because I'll admit wholeheartedly that I'm not a power scaler. I'm not somebody who's going to sit there and say this person's stronger than this person because this. Because I find those arguments very opinion-based. No two people are going to have the same mentality on it. So to me, it makes no sense to do that in a traditional sense, rather offering up what the characters could potentially do and how they may fare in a basic battle against one another and what win conditions could potentially be. I'm curious what you think. But leave a comment down below if you think it's something that I should try to get into. Because, thanks to my significant other, I now have a recording studio within our home. So it's going to be easier for me to make more content on a regular basis. So as I get ahead and actually get things sorted out, um, I'll have an easier time making more, shall we say, analytical content. Which I'll admit is something that I feel is lacking within this particular channel. Anywho, 5 scans in here, 3, 4, 5, and straight up to the Flagra Arena. Honestly, I really enjoy how the world is kind of loops back on itself in the Prime games. Each area has an easier way of getting back to a prior area in some capacity. I admit that there are certain things within the trilogy that make it harder to immerse oneself into it. But the fact that the world is interconnected, especially in 1 and 2, makes it easier to get engrossed in the world of Talon 4 of Aether. And time for the most questionable enemy in the game, the Chozo Ghosts. Now, I find they're a little harder to comprehend. I like the concept of an enemy that can get from A to B and is hard to track. What I dislike about the concept and its execution is battling ghosts. Oh. So the idea that that they were going with this was that the Chozo had become one with nature prior to the meteor, and thus had found ways to transcend their timeline and effectively be able to see into the future. This is an extension of that. The Chozo were able to shed their physical bodies, but were angered by the consistent pollution and damaged environment that their home had fallen to. Thus, you end up with the Chozo Ghosts. Creatures of, shall I say, pure anger, lashing out at Samus, despite Samus being prophesized to be the one who would save the planet. So, it's not my favorite circumstance, and I do think that Prime 2 did the teleporting enemies a fair bit easier, or fair bit better than Prime 1 did. But that is a matter of opinion and immersion. Anyways, gonna keep bonking these guys. And forgot that missiles don't work on them. Which, whatever. They're have non-corporeal forms, so I should have expected that. Now, I'm curious a little bit how you feel about the potential Phazon X parasite theory. As I said, it was half-baked. To me, it makes sense within the world building and perhaps trying to trace the main series and the Prime games back together. And I feel like that would be one way to go about doing it. Would be to either introduce one into the other. Either to introduce Phazon into, like, Metroid Dread's timeline. or the X parasite into the Prime timeline in order to tie them back together. I don't know. It's just a theory. Finally, the third one is down. And with that, we have the second of 12 artifacts. And as a result, we are now 12 to 16% done the artifact hunt. Yeah. I've got a little bit of time left. I think I'll take a side route and end close to where we fought the Hive Mecha. Because there's one other upgrade in that area that would be easy enough to get. And then next time we'll head, I think, back to Phendrana. No, Ice Beam, then Phendrana. Because we need the gravity suit. Yes. So next time, we're after the gravity suit. If you like what you see, have theories you'd love to share, or any way you would like it to go, drop a like, leave a subscribe, and hopefully we'll catch you next time. Gotta love the bats. Ow. A little bit of a slow go here. One of those ones that I should have been able to get earlier, but completely neglected until now. Whoops. Yeah, it's just a map station. You know, I'd love to hear a bunch of theories. I make a lot, but I have no idea if they're anywhere near feasible. Anyways, have a good one.